You know, Father's Day is such a special day to me. You know, there's a lot of things in life that I enjoy doing, but they pale in comparison to being a dad. You know, they really do. Even on its hardest days, there's nothing quite like being a dad. And those of you that are fathers, I think you would probably agree with that. There's a lot of things in life that I set out to do, a lot of goals that I have for myself, things that I hope that I can do well, but at the end of the day, the only thing that I really hope that at the end of my life I can say I did well was being a dad. You know, I can fail at anything else and I can deal with that, but I don't ever fail as being a dad. And so Father's Day is an important day. In fact, this weekend my kids had got me a number of small gifts for Father's Day. They got me a couple of different shirts that all kind of have something to do with my personality, the things I'm interested in. But one of them says, I think it says Dad, and then underneath it says the hardest job you'll ever love. And that really is true. It is the hardest job you'll ever love. And you know, my kids, they love to give gifts. They do. They're gift-giving kids. They're always either making something, drawing a picture, building something, and I come home from work and they are so excited. It doesn't matter what it is, to give it to me, it is a gift because they just love to give gifts, and especially Cooper. I mean, he's someone where if you know much about love languages, Cooper, he is a gift giver. Gift giving is his love language all the way. He loves to give gifts. It's his way. If he gives you something, he must love you because that is just what he does. And so they love to give gifts. But not all the gifts they give are tangible. Not all the gifts they give are things that you can hold in your hand. Sometimes the gifts they've given me are things that I would call character gifts, things that they have done in my life that have developed me and who I am and the character that I have. For instance, they've given me the gift of a much stronger gag reflex. Those of you that know me, if you knew how I was before I had kids, if I even thought that there was the remote possibility that somebody might be throwing up the house next door, if I could hear anything at all, you better get out of the way because I was the next to throw up. I did not handle it well. Well, then you have kids and you realize that there are smells and fluids that come out of them that you did not know were humanly possible. And so I can thank them for the fact that I now have a much stronger gag reflex than I used to. It's still not as good as Caitlin's, but I'm working on it. So that's a gift. Or how about the gift of nerves of steel, right? There's nothing like sitting at a restaurant, especially one that's taking longer than usual for your food to be prepared. And they finally bring it to the table, and you are cutting those chicken fingers as fast as you possibly can, despite the second-degree burns that your fingertips might be receiving, because your child is hungry, and everyone in the restaurant knows that your child is hungry, and you just got to stay focused on the task at hand. It's like diffusing a bomb while like a howler monkey is screaming in your ear. Like you just have to get it done, you know, because if you don't, then everybody's experience is going to be ruined. And so you just got to stay focused. And so that's a gift that they've given me. Or the gift of self-confidence, right? If you are easily embarrassed in public settings, do not have children. Because they will say some of the strangest, weirdest, inappropriate things and embarrassing stuff as loud as they can in public. I mean, when your kids start telling the cashier at Walmart how hairy your back is, you just got to stand tall and just be proud because it's just, you got to have some confidence, right? You can't get embarrassed easily. You can't. You know, it's pretty bad when you have to have a locker room pep talk in your vehicle with your 4-year-old before you go into Walmart to warn them, don't ask why people look funny, you know, because Parker one time saw somebody who had a larger mole on their face than what he had ever seen. And he looked and he goes, holy cow, what is on their face? They got to get that off. And I'm just like melting in my shoes, right? Like we have like a rule with Parker. Caitlin has this thing that she does with him that when we're at Walmart or any public setting, that if he's about to say something about somebody, like she gives him the stare because she knows. She can sense it. When he's about to say something embarrassing, and she'll touch his arm, she'll look at him with this like laser look, like, what are you supposed to do? And he's like, whisper it to mommy. right? So he'll whisper it first to her, and then she'll give him the go-ahead to say it. And usually it's, don't say that, right? Because they say embarrassing things. But these are the gifts that our children give us. They give us these intangible things that you can't really hold in your hand, but they develop your character as a person. And as a dad, I'm grateful for some of the character development. And sometimes I'm still wondering when that's really going to benefit me in life, right? But they give us gifts. You know, this Father's Day especially, some of you are going to receive a gift or two, or three, or however many you get. Some of you are going to receive something from your kids that says to you, Happy Father's Day. And while that's a great thing, I kind of want to challenge the fathers in the room today to kind of think about this differently, to kind of flip Father's Day, if you will. Because Father's Day is a day where we receive gifts from our kids oftentimes. But what if we were to flip it? And instead of us receiving a gift from our kids, what if today we made a decision to give a gift back to our kids? Rather than receiving a gift, what if we gave a gift back and flipped it? We read this story in the Bible in 1 Kings chapter 2, this account of a father who's about to die. He's on his deathbed. And before he dies, he calls his son into him and he gives him something. And what he gives him is not this tangible thing that he can hold. I'm talking about King David. You all know King David, the most famous king in Israel's history, reigned in Israel for 40 years. Did David always get it right? No. But he was a man after God's own heart. And he served God. And he led the nation of Israel faithfully through most of his time as king. And he had a son named Solomon. He had more than one child, but Solomon was going to be the one who would inherit his kingdom, who would inherit his throne. And so obviously the obvious gift that David was going to give to Solomon was his throne, his throne, his role as king, and all that he possessed as king. All the earthly possessions that David had were going to be Solomon's. Solomon was going to inherit something grand. But that wasn't the final gift that we see between David and Solomon. In fact, what happens is that David calls Solomon to his deathbed. And he says something to him in chapter 2 of 1 Kings. It only lasts 4 verses. It's a very short thing that he has to say. But when I read this, I believe that truly, despite all the things that he was going to give Solomon, the tangible things, the things he could hold in his hand, the riches and the wealth and the throne and the prestige and the role of king, the leader of the entire nation of Israel, the thing that he gives him on his deathbed was far more precious and priceless than anything that he could have given him that was tangible. So if you have your Bibles, if you go to 1 Kings chapter 2, we'll see what happens here. 1 Kings 2, 1 through 4. And this is what it says. At the time of King David's death approached, he gave this charge to his son Solomon. I am going where everyone on earth must someday go. Take courage and be a man. Observe the requirements of the Lord your God and follow all his ways. Keep the decrees, commands, regulations, and laws written in the law of Moses so that you will be successful in all you do wherever you go. If you do this, then the Lord will keep the promise he made to me. He told me, if your descendants live as they should and follow me faithfully with all their hearts and soul, one of them will always sit on the throne of Israel. 4 little verses that say an awful lot about what David valued and what he had hoped to give to his son when he was gone. Here, David says some things that, if listened to, will set Solomon up for a life of blessing, for a life of reward. And we know that what he says here is important because oftentimes it's the last things that people say in Scripture that tend to be the most important. What was one of the last things that Jesus said to his followers before his ascension? It was his Great Commission. It was also to tell them to wait into Jerusalem for the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And so we know that the last things that people say are some of the most important. And so this is actually the last thing recorded in the Scripture that David ever says to his son. We don't know if there was any other conversation beyond this, but what we know in Scripture, this is the last thing recorded that he said. So we know it's important. He said 4 things to him. 4 things. He said, I'm about to die just like everybody else. And that's important. We're going to come back to this in a moment. But I'm about to die just like everybody else. The other thing he says, take courage and be a man. Take courage and be a man. Obey God. That's the 3rd thing. And the 4th thing he says, because our legacy depends on it. So he says, I'm about to die. This life that I've lived was temporary. It was fleeting, and it's over. So take courage and be a man. Obey God, because our legacy depends on it. These 4 things that he says I think are very important, and we can take lessons from them. So let's look at the first one. When he says, I'm about to die, just as everyone will. What he is basically reminding Solomon of is that life is temporary. There's one thing that we cannot make any more of. There's a lot of things that we can make as human beings with our creativity and our ingenuity and our ability. But one thing that we cannot make any more of is time. Because when it's gone, it's gone. There is no getting it back. Right? Time is that one thing that no matter how much we try to grab onto it, it will slip through every single one of our fingers. It's fleeting. And he's reminding Solomon of that fact. You cannot get it back. And eventually it will run out. And every single person, every single one of us will die. Some sooner than others. But at the end of the day, all of us will run out of time. It's a fact of life. It's part of the way this world works. And he's reminding his son of that. The psalmist said it best in Psalm 39, 4-5. He said, Lord, remind me how brief my time on earth will be. Remind me that my days are numbered, how fleeting my life is. You have made my life no longer than the width of my hand. My entire lifetime is just a moment to you. At best, each one of us is but a breath. Each one of us is but a breath. Time is fleeting. Not only is life on a grand scale fleeting, but the seasons we find ourselves in life are fleeting. We have all lived in different seasons of our lives, different points in our lives where our lives looked a certain way and we did things a certain way and we experienced life a certain way, and that season eventually ends and we begin a new season in life. You've all experienced the changing of seasons in our lives. They're all temporary. As a father, my time is fleeting as a dad. And if you're a father here today, your time is fleeting. We often think of it in terms of years, don't we? We say to ourselves, we have 18 years with our kids before they become adults. 18 years. Now, when you talk about it in terms of years, that seems like a pretty long time, 18 years. At 33 now, 18 years doesn't seem quite so long. And those of you that are older than me, it probably seems even shorter. The older we get, the quicker it seems that time goes by. But I want to change the perspective a little bit. I want to look at it a different way. Not only do we only have 18 years with our kids before they become adults, how about in terms of weeks? You know how many weeks you have with your children from the time they're born to the time they are adults? You have 936 weeks. That's it. 936 weeks is all you have. That isn't a lot of time when you really think about it. 936 weeks. I get 936 weeks before my kids are adults and are able to make their own decisions, set their own priorities, and determine the course of their life as they see fit. If your children are 7, like my oldest is, I've already lost 364 of those weeks. He's 7, and I've already lost 364 that I cannot get back. If your kids are a little bit older, say 9, you're in the middle. From this point forward, you have less weeks left than what have already passed. Did you ever think about that? I heard it said on Focus on the Family, I heard a person talking about this idea of 936 weeks. And this pastor had challenged, when they do baby dedications, they challenged families to, in fact, he gives every family that he dedicates a baby to, he gives them a jar with 936 pennies in it. And he says, every week of your child's life, the challenge is to take one of those pennies out and place it in a different jar. And the idea behind that is that with every penny, it's a reminder that that's one gone that you cannot get back. And as you see that jar begin to go down and the other jar begin to go up, it's a sobering reminder of how short the season we are in is with our kids. And those of you who have kids who are grown and are out of the home, you can probably relate to what I'm talking about. Probably seems like yesterday your children were young, and now they have their own children. It's fleeting. Fathers, you want to give your kids a gift? Give them the gift of your time. Give them the gift of your time. Because it's the one gift you cannot make up. You cannot make it up. It's the one thing that if we blow it now, it is very difficult to put it back together afterward. And I get it, sometimes it's hard. Especially if we have busy schedules, demanding schedules, if we have demanding jobs. As a bivocational pastor who works as a school teacher and pastors a church, I can tell you that my free time is low. I don't have the free time that I used to have. And so there are things that I used to be able to get done that now I look at my calendar and at the end of the week, there just isn't enough week left. And if I'm not careful, my time spent with my kids can get put onto the back burner. It can get sacrificed for the sake of accomplishing another task that I set out to do. And so all of us as fathers have to be very careful. We have to be intentional, and we have to be willing to sometimes let things go. Things that we want to do, things that we think are so important. And don't get me wrong, there are things that we have to do. There's priorities that we have to keep. There's things that we have to take care of. But then there's things that we think are so important that if they don't get done today, somehow life is over. So sometimes we've got to be intentional. We've got to be willing to let those things go another day, another week. So that we don't lose that time that we have. So at the end of the week, we don't look at that penny and say, that one's gone. And what did I do with it? Give our kids the gift of time. And one more thing on this point, if your kids feel as though you are with them, but you're not really with them, if your kids feel like they're an interruption to your schedule, if your kids feel like they're keeping you from something else that you'd rather be doing, believe me, they know it. And it would be better for us as dads to not spend time with them than it would be to be with them physically, but to be mentally and emotionally somewhere else altogether. Because all we're going to do is make our kids feel even worse, because they're going to feel like they're more of a distraction and more of a problem than they are a priority. And so we need to give them the gift of time and to be present physically, mentally, emotionally. We've got to be willing to let things go, let things get done another time. When our kids are grown and have families of their own, I can promise you this. They aren't going to remember or care whether or not your grass was always the shortest when they were young, whether or not your car was always the shiniest. They're not going to care about any of that stuff. They won't. What they're going to care about, the thing that they're going to remember, is that they had a dad who was present and who made them a priority over the things that the world would tell us are more important. We want to give our gift to our kids. This gift that we give them of our time is not something they're going to hold in their hand, but it's something that they're going to hold in their heart. But it starts with us. We have to be willing to do that. We have to give them the gift of our time. The second thing David says on his deathbed in 1 Kings 2:2, he says to take courage and be a man. Take courage and be a man. Be a man. Now, I don't mean be a man the way that the world says be a man, the way that culture says be a man. I mean be a man as the way God defines being a man. Someone who leads his family, who protects his family, who provides for his family, and someone who teaches his family how to follow God. Someone who leads his family, protects his family, provides for his family, and teaches his family how to follow God. That's what I mean when I say to be a man. Because the world would attach all of these other things that said this is what it means to be a man. I don't care what the world thinks. I care what God has to say. And that's what you should care about. We got to be men. We got to be men. The kind of men that our kids can be proud of. The kind of men that God has called us to be. Someone who leads his family. How many here know that we have a masculinity crisis on our hands in this country? In this world, but really in this country. We have a masculinity crisis. We have a system that has been teaching us and our children that somehow to be a man is an evil thing. That somehow masculinity is like a curse or a sickness that we have to treat as if being a man was like cancer. We have devalued and downplayed the role of manhood and the significance of manhood, the significance of masculinity, and what it brings to society and how it helps build up society. And that when men are men properly, and men are men that honor God, and men are men that fulfill that role as God had intended, it is only going to make our families better, our government better, our society better. We have to be men. Because we have young boys that are looking to us right now to learn how to be men. And when I see my students at school, young teenage boys, they might think they're men, but they're still boys. And you begin to ask them what they think it means to be a man, they have no clue. Why? Because there's nobody showing them what it means to be a man. And David knew this was important for Solomon. He's going to be the next king of Israel, and he's saying, you got to take courage, and you got to step up, and you got to be a man. You got to be a man. We cannot afford to be passive. We cannot sit by idly and allow culture to raise our young men. We have to lead them. We have to train them. We have to be the example, because if we aren't, someone else will be. Someone else will be. And I promise you, you will not like the results. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do as men is to show up and be present. Because we have a lot of men in this world today that won't show up. Even if they are in the picture, they're not present, not emotionally available, not there mentally. I can't tell you how many conversations I overhear with people I work with about the relationships in their home between their husband and wife. And how it's just so evident to me that the dad is just a figurehead. Not really involved, not really making decisions, not really leading. Just sort of there. We cannot afford to let that happen. We have to fight for our families. Because if you don't realize it by now, there is a battle going on for your kids' souls, for my kids' souls. There are movements out there that are backed by Satan who wants nothing more than to steal our kids' hearts and turn them towards another. As men, as fathers, it is our responsibility to fight for our families, to fight for our kids. And that battle oftentimes begins on our knees in prayer. But it also involves being there and demonstrating to them what it means to be a man, demonstrating what it means to be a father, so that our sons know how to do that, and so our daughters know what to look for. Be men. We have to be men to stand the gap for our kids. You know, there's this moment in the book of Ezekiel where God is talking about the sin of Israel's leaders. And because Israel's leaders had been sinful and disobedient, he's talking about basically destroying them, bringing judgment upon the nation of Israel. And he says something to Ezekiel that I find to be somewhat mind-boggling. And this is what he says in Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 30. He says, I looked for someone. He says, I looked for someone who might rebuild the wall of righteousness that guards the land. I searched for someone to stand in the gap in the wall so I wouldn't have to destroy the land, but I found no one. Here God is saying, look, I don't want to destroy this land. I don't want to bring judgment on this people. If just one person, if just someone would stand up for truth, if someone would just stand up for righteousness, if somebody would just call people out of their sin, would just lead them the way they're meant to be led, then I won't have to do this. He said, but I found no one. God forgive us if he ever could say that about our families. If God could ever say, if only men, if only you fathers would stand up for righteousness, would stand up for truth, would guard your children's hearts, would guard your children's minds, would guard your wives' hearts and minds. If just someone would stand up and do it, but I found no one. May God never be able to say that about our families. May God never be able to say that about me. And I pray that you never want God to say that about you. We have to stand up and we have to be men. Because our children depend upon it. Our future depends upon it. The future of this nation depends upon it. The next thing that he says. So first he says, listen, I'm about to die. Because this life is temporary. So take courage and be a man. The third thing he says is in 1 Kings 2:3. He says, observe the requirements of the Lord your God and follow all his ways. Keep the decrees, commands, regulations, and laws written in the law of Moses so that you will be successful in all you do wherever you go. In other words, he says, Solomon, you've got to follow God. You've got to follow God. This is really the heart of it right here. Life is short, Solomon. You only get one chance to do it right. So be a man and lead. But in order to lead, you have to learn to follow. In order to lead, you have to learn to follow. Oftentimes as men, we like to think that we have all the answers, don't we? We will drive around aimlessly for hours before we stop to ask for directions. We will put that grill together wrong 15 times before we actually look at the manual. Because we like to think that we have all the answers, that we know everything. Our egos oftentimes get in the way. But the fact of the matter is that you and I will fail every time at leading our families if we don't first learn to follow God. If we don't first learn to follow him, we will never be able to lead. We will fail every time. It's hard for us to admit that we don't measure up. It's hard for us to admit that we don't have the answers. It's hard for us to admit that we've made a mistake. But we have to remember that we have a God who is amazingly graceful. David didn't always get it right. If you know much about David's story, you know he failed pretty miserably at a point in his life. But God's grace sustained him. And God still considered him to be a man after his own heart. We have a God who loves us so much that he died for us. He left us his Holy Spirit for any who would believe in Jesus to guide us and to show us how to lead. We become leaders as we learn to follow God and his word. Because here's the thing. If on David's deathbed, this was the first time that Solomon had ever heard his father say to follow God, it would not have meant anything to him. We know that David was not someone who just said that at the end of his life. He was someone who lived it out. Solomon would have grown up watching his father follow God. He would have grown up seeing his father follow God. David led by following, so that Solomon would do the same. Most of us, I think, would agree that we want better for our kids than we had. So if you want your kids to grow up to be a faithful follower of Jesus, then you have to step up and be a faithful follower. You can't just tell your kids what they should do. You have to show them what they should do. I can't tell you how many times I've heard new parents say, I want my children to have religion, so I'm going to take them to church. That's a nice sentiment, but it doesn't work. Simply taking your kids to church is not going to work. If you're expecting your children to want to emulate the pastor, their children's church teacher, or their youth pastor, you are putting your hope in the wrong thing, because they're not going to emulate those people. Who they're going to emulate? Their father and their mother. But their father has such a special power over their children. They want to make them proud. They want to emulate them. They want to be like them. It isn't enough to simply say, I want my kids to have religion, so I'm going to go to church. We have to demonstrate what it means to be a follower of Jesus. We can't just take them to church and expect them to grow up to be faithful Christians. It's not going to work. It won't work. If serving God is an afterthought, if going to church and serving in the church is an afterthought or something that you do when nothing else is going on, then your kids will one day grow up to be teenagers. And it will be an afterthought for them as well. If there's something better to do than go to church, and they see us as parents doing that, now don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be legalistic here. You want to go on vacation, go on vacation. You got to family function to go to that family function. But if they see that every single time there's something better to do, you're doing that thing, then guess what? When they get to be older, anytime there's something else going on they'd rather do, guess what they're going to do? They're going to go do that thing. And then as parents, we're going to be sitting back and we're going to say, I don't know why my kids don't want to go to church. I don't know why my kids are interested in this stuff, because they didn't see us interested in that stuff. We've got to emulate it. We've got to demonstrate it. And fathers, it starts with us. When's the last time, fathers, that your kids saw you sacrifice something you wanted or something that you had hoped to do in order to follow Jesus? When's the last time they saw us sacrifice something to make Jesus a priority, to make serving a priority, to make being part of his body a priority? If they don't see us sacrificing stuff to do that, you think they're going to do it? No. You've got to show them how to obey God, not just tell them to do it. You have to follow in order to lead. You have to demonstrate in order for them to learn. And the last thing he says to him on his deathbed is he says, all these things, Solomon, you have to do because our legacy depends on it. Our legacy depends on it. 1 Kings 2:4. He says, if you do this, referring to the things that he just told him to do. If you do this, then the Lord will keep the promise he made to me. He told me, if your descendants live as they should and follow me faithfully with all their heart and soul, one of them will always sit on the throne of Israel. One of them will always sit on the throne of Israel. David had a legacy, and he knew that his legacy was dependent upon the way that he raised his son. And his legacy would be dependent upon the way that he raised his children. He's saying, look, what happens after I'm gone is on your shoulders now. I've done everything I could do as your father to prepare you and to set you up for life. And I'm about to leave this world. And when I do, what happens next, that's now up to you. And the hope that David had is that, Solomon, you're going to do this stuff. You're going to live this way, because when you're long and gone, hopefully whoever comes after you will continue to do these things. Their legacy depended upon them following what David had said. By taking courage and being a man, recognizing that this life is short and it is fleeting and we only have one shot to get it right. And that if we're going to be men, we got to follow God. And if we do that, then when we're gone from this place, there will be a legacy left behind us that could stretch for generations. You and I could have family members that are our great-great-great-great-grandchildren that we will never meet on this side of eternity, whose lives are blessed by God, who live faithfully to serve him and to honor him, who live blessed lives. Why? Because you and I made a decision in this lifetime to get it right, so that they have a chance to get it right. The legacy depended on it. Maybe your kids are grown. Maybe they're already out of the home. Maybe you know that you did things in a way that at the time you thought were right, but now as you've grown in your faith, you realize you've made mistakes. Maybe you didn't do some of these things that I'm talking about when they were younger. Does it mean it's too late? Absolutely not. Does it mean it'll be harder? Most definitely. But I encourage you this morning to run to your kids. Admit that you failed. Seek their forgiveness. And resolve to do differently. Resolve to do better. Resolve to do everything as it depends upon you to do these things that I'm talking about here this morning. Whether they're young or whether they're grown. You've got grandchildren. You got another opportunity there with your grandkids. If you've got nieces and nephews, you've got another opportunity with your nieces and your nephews. It is my prayer that someday when I'm long gone, when it comes to my descendants, that there will be dozens of families who serve Christ faithfully. That's my prayer. I find myself, times not every day, but I find myself in my devotion times praying for my great-grandchildren. I have no idea if I'm ever going to have great-grandchildren, but I pray for them. Because it's my hope that when I'm gone, that I left some sort of fingerprint in the DNA of my family that will outlive me. That's my hope. That's my prayer, and I hope it's your prayer. It's my hope that the destiny of generations of people that I will never meet on this side of eternity will love God because of my decision to be the father that my kids needed me to be and to be the father that my kids deserve to have. I pray you want the same thing. So I challenge you this Father's Day, men. First, let me thank you for what you provide and what you offer to your family. The fact that you're here today says something because there are fathers all around that are nowhere near a church today. So I thank you for what you bring to your family and what you provide. I encourage you to keep going no matter how hard it gets. And I challenge you to consider the things that I've talked about this morning and ask yourself the question, am I doing these things to the best of my ability? Because none of us are perfect. None of us get it right all the time. But if we know that we're not getting it right, if we know that we're failing and we do nothing about it, then we will have no one to blame but ourselves. Amen.